Today's guest is David Gall, who is the co-founder of Ugimi, which is the first AI meditation coach, which has the goal of helping 1 billion people fix their mental health through highly personalized daily meditation coaching. In addition, David has also had two prior exits. He's been a product designer and a licensed architect. All in all, he loves creating and innovating new products and bringing them into the world. So, David, thank you very much for being on. How are you doing today?
Drosko, great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to dive in with you to what's going on.
Yeah, me too, especially since tech founders or tech people generally aren't too prone to like doing this, especially not live. So the fact that we have somebody from this space is super cool to me. So yeah, I'd love to know how you got to doing what you're doing and just a little bit of background on you.
Yeah, thank you. So I actually started out my career in architecture, and I don't know if you know much about that career, but it's definitely a grind. Through 5 years of architecture school, the building that I worked out of at Cornell was known as the building where the lights never turned off. And that means all-nighters constantly. You're always staying up, trying to improve something that's very subjective, right? And the net result of that, when you enter your architecture career, is 60 to 80-hour weeks, high intensity, very competitive industry, not a lot of pay, people grinding. And the reason I say this is about a year into that career, I took a vacation to California to visit my brother. And it took stepping away from the day to day to realize how burnt out I was. I was exhausted. I was stressed. My body hurt. I was gaining weight. Basically, not on a trajectory that was sustainable. And so it took stepping away to realize that. And I flew back from that vacation, and it was a wake up call. I started the paleo diet. I started exercising 3 times a week, and I started a meditation practice. So this was 15 years ago. And since I began meditation, it's been a regular practice for me, and it's been deeply meaningful in terms of keeping me grounded and focused and introspective through the next 5 years of my architecture career, and then 2 startups, which, as you know, are also a grind. And so it hasn't been easy, but meditation has been, again, deeply meaningful to me throughout that process. And so when I looked to start my latest company, actually I was 4 years into my last company when I had another sort of existential crisis, which was I kind of woke up one day and realized that the work I was doing wasn't meaningful in the world. I didn't feel like I had a sense of purpose. I didn't feel like I was really helping people. I was sort of helping make let's call it real estate developers more wealthy. And that wake up call kind of led me to, even though I'm having fun doing entrepreneurship and technology, I'm lacking this sense of mission and purpose. And so when I sold that business, I took some time off and sat back and thought, what can I do that's meaningful and purposeful in this world? What's been meaningful to me? And if I could help other people discover that and make that transition, I will have made a meaningful difference in the world. So I kind of believe that the person that you're qualified to help is a person that you used to be. And in this case, that's how I felt about meditation. And so hence our mission that you stated, to help 1 billion people create and sustain a meditation habit. We know that if we've succeeded at that, we've succeeded in making the world a better place.
I mean, that's super cool because it's like the one anchor you had throughout this career of exactly the complete opposite of like what meditation actually gives you. Like that becomes this thing that blossoms into like the purpose and like the thing that I want to do next. So I think that's a very cool way of like the theme of like your mess becomes your message comes up quite often on this podcast.
Yeah.
It's generally because a lot of like other coaches or healers or kind of people in that space tend to gravitate towards doing work like this. So like it has more of a direct correlation, but I love the fact that for you, it's not necessarily your mess in so much as like it's then becomes your anchor, then now becomes the thing that drives you forward. So I think that's actually super cool and a super interesting arc that I don't oftentimes see. So if you want to add anything to that or comment, floor is yours for that.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. It's like it was call it my crutch over the years. And now it's become, the way for me to offer that support to other people.
Love it. Well, I mean, in that case, perfect segue as to, how can I support you today?
Yeah, so despite 15 years of deep meditation, a lot of personal work, work with coaches, I still have head trash. I still have things that I catch myself doing. I still have daily struggles, and I'm a regular user of our own app. Like I walk the walk. If I'm having an issue or a struggle, I check in with myself. I take the time to sit down, do a meditation, figure out what's going on, and see how I can move through it. But yeah, that's what brought me here. Always looking to grow, always looking to improve.
Beautiful. So what head trash kind of is most relevant for you right now, right? Or put a different way, like what are the top challenges or problems that you're facing right now?
Yeah, I think given that we're a startup and it's early, it's kind of the constant nagging doubts, the uncertainty and wondering, hey, how will this work, or will this work? Will we succeed? Will we fail? There's a constant tension at a startup between your sort of dogged optimism that it takes to essentially drag something into the world that the world doesn't necessarily know that it needs or that it wants. And really, that's holding a constant vision for what the world could be, right? That's kind of an entrepreneur's job, is to say, like, it's not this yet, but the world could be this. So I have that optimism and that excitement, but on a daily basis, I encounter those doubts and those uncertainties and setbacks. One of the hardest things, I'd say that probably the two hardest things are uh, getting negative feedback from users, which honestly isn't happening all that often. But every time you hear something didn't work or you feel like you let someone down, that's emotionally challenging. And then on the other side, we are fundraising for the business, and it can be hard to hear no's. You're putting yourself out there, you're asking for someone's support, and when you do that and someone says no, it raises the doubts. Oh, am I doing something wrong? Was it something I said? you know is my pitch bad? Is our business model wrong? Right? So there's lots of things that come up, and so those are probably two examples of head trash that I'm dealing with right now.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think number one, the self-awareness of it is like very high, right? Like it's very clear this is not your first foray into diving into these work or like exploring all these things that come up. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for that. And then number two, so given that you are aware of these things, given that you have worked through them, or at least attempted to work through them in different capacities and at different times, if you had to coach yourself through this, like what might you actually do?
Yeah, I think it would be in many ways the way that I coach myself is a reminder of past experience where I've felt this way and it's worked out. And so, I can remember clearly in my last two startups, lots of times where I felt like I was in a valley, and like things weren't going to work. And then I can distinctly remember the moments that shifted, and one conversation or one deal or one thing that shifted the trajectory of the company. And so that's a lot of the coaching that I do, is just remember, like, um plant plant as many seeds as you can, and one of them will sprout, and often it'll sprout like just when you need it. Just when you hit that kind of wall, and that really where maybe the doubts have culminated to the point of overwhelm, and then all of a sudden something shifts, and I just remember that from the past. So part of the coaching is just keep going. As long as you show up every day and you put in the effort, you will be eventually rewarded for that. It may not come at exactly the time that you hope that it will, or that you expect it will, but that's sort of the coaching that I go on a daily basis. And I kind of allow myself, if I'm having that moment of doubt, it's a little bit of like, if a kid trips and falls and they skin their knees, it's okay for them to pout about that for 5 to 10 minutes, but then it's also kind of like, all right, let's pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and move forward. So I try to check myself and say, go for it, be upset that this person said no to you for 10 minutes and then, look at your list of things to do, sit back down and go do it.
Got it. So it seems like a lot of the way that you've managed this in the past and right now is really about managing and coping with how these things pop up. So like the doubt pops up, sometimes it gets overwhelming. I try to nip it in the bud before it gets overwhelming. So I'm trying to basically anchor into past evidence that I've overcome a lot of hurdles. I've won a lot of times as well. So come up with, a better story, more evidence that I actually have around these things. And then the pep talks to anchor into, well, okay, let's reframe this. I know if I keep going, like eventually something is going to happen. I'll gather more data. I'll make better decisions. Like that seems to be the general premise. Is that accurate?
That's a good summary.
Okay, perfect. So how has that been working for you, like long term, as far as, let's just say, eliminating or transcending these patterns to the point where they're like few and far between?
Mm. Yeah, good question. I guess the fact that they are showing up means that maybe it's not completely eliminating them, right? That it's maybe like uh, a way of coping through like almost dogged persistence and grit, and maybe not necessarily a total shift.
Right. Like it sounds to me like when you're talking about it, it's like there's this tendency or reliance on like, let me just outthink my way out of these feelings.
Mm.
Right. Like if I just look for enough evidence, if I just push long enough, if I just create a better enough story, then these feelings go away. Like, would that be accurate of your experience?
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So when like if you would just like switch gears a little bit, like when I initially spoke to you about, okay, well, what are the top challenges right now? What are you um kind of struggling with? When you described your doubts and your uncertainty, or like let's just say the feedback from users, right? You were saying things like, okay, I let somebody down. Am I doing something wrong? Is this thing going to succeed? Am I essentially good enough to make this thing happen? There's a lot of self-identification in like everything is anchored into, it's like a reflection of me and who I am. So before I go on, what lands for you from that?
Yeah, that's such an amazing reflection. Because I can see as you say it, I can hear the I element of it and like the identification versus I could probably regurgitate all of those things in a different way, which would be like um, there's something wrong with the app. The app could use improvement in this place, or there's a part of my pitch that's not landing. I could improve the pitch in this way. And I can see how actually that different that might be, and where it would result probably in uh, taking the feedback and being able to act on it immediately, because it's not being identified with self.
Correct. So what I generally ascribe what you just shared is like it becomes easier over time when it's not part of your identity to separate the data from the drama, right? So like feedback about the app, feedback on your pitch, data about signups, not signups, whatever. Like that's all in some ways objective data. But right now, because the default lens through which you view the data is rooted in identity, then it balloons the whole thing with this additional drama.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's very hard to A, show up objectively, B, it requires more time for you to actually self-regulate deep enough to like get to a state where you can look at it objectively. And then C, there's always all this additional baggage into doing the next thing that's going to threaten the drama. So what's coming up for you there?
Yeah, I can see it more clearly now that you've pointed it out. And I could see how it would make it easier on a day-to-day basis to kind of just look objectively at what's happening, um, rather than focusing so much on my role in it, or my lack of attention, or my lack of something, right? And I could see that would make it easier to just kind of show up and focus on improving something outside of myself, instead of worrying so much about who I am and how I'm showing up.
Got it. So if that's landing, why do you think it's so hard to let go of that?
um I think probably like the other thing that I mentioned was, on the positive side, right? One of the things that I love about entrepreneurship is the that is like my personal and creative contribution to the world, right? And so um maybe that's a little bit of an ego identification as well, but saying like, this is part of my purpose and my value, and something that without me it wouldn't exist. And so that might be part of why I identify with it so much, is because on the other side of it, I want to identify with it in a positive way, right? I want, um that helps, I think, with my sense of fulfillment, uh and my sort of day-to-day feeling of usefulness.
Got it. So unless I'm contributing positively to the world, I'm not useful. Okay. So, hey, well, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that's that's part of how, at least how I'd like to show up in the world, right?
Okay. And if you weren't useful to the world, then fill in the blank.
It's funny, I was having a conversation yesterday about the meaning of life. And so as it relates to this, I think my conclusion in that conversation was that the purpose of being a human is to experience, to just experience, and to apply more meaning to it than that, is where it starts to get messy. And so I could see how in some ways I'm applying more meaning to it, right? And that, my need to feel useful is not related to my fundamental belief around the core aspect of human experience, is to just exist and experience what it is to exist.
So I would actually like agree with you as far as like a general sentiment on, what is this all about? And I think it's actually beautifully articulated. And what I also find interesting is it kind of skirted the original question to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I wasn't useful to the world, then fill in the blank. Where your brain goes off to is, well, the meaning of life is X, Y, Z. So
Yeah.
why do you think it kind of deflected from the question?
Yeah, I guess if the direct answer to the question would have been probably, if I'm not useful in the world, then I'm useless in the world, right? There's the contrast that would have. I think that must be the subconscious underlying feeling, because there has to be, if there's a yin, there's a yang, right? So if I'm not useful, then I'm useless.
Correct. So
Yeah.
now there's a big part of your identity that's locked into your doubts, right? It's hard to let go because to let go of them means letting go of actually being useful in the world. And we never do anything that goes against our beliefs. Whether those beliefs are understood or we have awareness of them, that's a totally different story. But you see how like it's very hard for you to operate in a more peaceful state that doesn't require you to cope with all these doubts, because in many ways to let go of the doubts means to let go of the very thing that your brain has believed actually makes you useful.
Mhm.
So what's coming out for you there?
Yeah, I was reflecting that I think this does play in more in my professional life than my personal life. Um, I was thinking that I do feel like in my personal life, I'm more willing to just be that, you know, with friends or family that I feel less of a need to be useful and more of just to coexist, like kind of coming back to that bigger concept, to just spend time with and um, enjoy each other's company and do the simple things, enjoy food, play music. And so I'm wondering if it is carrying over to my personal life, or if this challenge is more rooted in this sense of like work and professionalism and need to be productive in this part of my life. I'm just trying to dissect it, if it's showing up in all of my life or just in my work life.
Right. So maybe, right, like I don't have like I don't know you enough to be able to say like, yeah, I think so or I don't think so. What I would reflect back from just that share is you don't need to be useful to have friends. Like you can just coexist with people because they like your company, you like their company, you can share in music and food, and it's great,
Yeah.
right? So it's like I can see why there's a tendency that like this only generally shows up in my work, doesn't show up in my personal life. So it's probably not that big of a deal. Like that's how
Yeah.
the resistance part of us is going to justify this away. But the reality is, if there's a desire for you to live without constantly being in doubt, without constantly being in fear of rejection, without constantly being in the drama and the baggage of this, then the anchor to that is my inability to let go of the fact that me being useless is the biggest fear that my ego actually has. So now when I go into my business, I have to optimize, knowingly or not, to be useful in all instances at all times, which
Mhm.
in the best case scenario gets exhausting. In the worst case scenario, it actually keeps you from doing the iterations, the explorations, and experimentations that are needed to actually move the needle forward. So again, what lands for you there?
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see how it can become a trap. Um, and the just in some ways, like over identifying with that need for usefulness can become the thing that I'm trying to achieve, rather than the actual thing that I want to achieve, if I can let go of that piece of it, right? Um, I can see how it can become a trap. I don't necessarily see the obvious easy way out of it.
Yeah, and again, what I mentioned about your self-awareness, like you have a very good sense of like taking something in, seeing where it actually connects, seeing the patterns, and like, okay, like I understand this better, which is a great quality to have, obviously. And if we were to zoom out a little bit right now, if you are looking at these, so let's just say if we even took them one by one, right? So this, my identity is tied very much to the doubts I experience. How is this creating problems in your business?
I don't know why this analogy came to mind, but I'll just share it. I remember hearing once that if you put a shiny object in a jar, if a raccoon reaches in and it can get its hand through the hole and then grabs the shiny object, but it can't get it out, it won't let go and it will get stuck there. Um, so like I'm sort of like I'm using this as an analogy to see myself like holding on to this need to be usefulness, and how that's might be keeping me trapped. Anyway, it's a funny analogy that came to mind. Can you ask the question again? Because I got so caught up in that I forgot what it was.
Yeah, is yeah, no problem. Sorry, I'm just writing this down. So the original question was if you looked at this, like one of the things we identified today is like there's this identity need in your doubt and to be useful. Okay. What came up for you was okay, well, there's a strong attachment, right? Like that the symbolic part of that imagery is like the raccoon's stuck, but he won't let go of it.
Yeah.
So, okay, fair. If that's your current state with this pattern, that's fair. And let's zoom out and see, how is it actually creating problems in my business? What's the consequence of that in
Mhm.
terms of what it is that I'm doing as the leader in the business, as the one who's driving it, as the one who's making decisions? What comes off for you there?
Yeah, I can see how a a lot of my day-to-day time is spent focused on um, time consuming activities, and how I may not be taking enough of a step back on a regular basis to say, how can I um, do this, get this done more efficiently, whether it's myself figuring out a way to automate it, or delegating, or getting help, um, versus just the kind of willingness to do it and do that kind of rote work, that's probably not using my time and my leadership to its fullest potential. And I can see how that would relate back to um, like earlier parts of my career, where that really was the job, right? Like in this first year of my architecture career that I referred to at the beginning, that kind of led to burnout. Um, that's what I was getting paid to do. And there was really no role for me outside of that. It was, here's this thing that needs to be done, whether it's, copying a toilet 1,000 times, or, gluing these sticks onto this model all night. How the recognition that I got for that work and the success that it led to, because I was, promoted rapidly and acknowledged, and, was successful within that career, may have created a habit around that, that sort of day-to-day usefulness that may not be serving me nearly as much as a leader now that I'm at a different point in my career.
Correct. And again, very good and astute observations of how these things connect. What I would um, invite you to also consider, because you mentioned leadership multiple times, doing, you mentioned, okay, I do consuming activities. I'm not taking a step back to see what can be done more efficiently. I do these sort of rote activities. That's not actually leadership, right? Like that is doing the things that technically other people could be doing, that's outside the role of what you need to step into to grow the business. And it's like it's taken away from the autonomy of, whoever else is on your team, or whoever else could be taking on that role. So if anything, it's actually perpetuating non-leadership, because it's perpetuating your need to do things that look useful versus what's actually required and needed from whoever I need to be the leader to move forward. So what's landing for you there?
Yeah, I think that's what I was realizing in the moment, was that I, was doing non-leadership things, but out of the need to feel useful, and not taking the, I was, when I was referring to leadership, I was referring more to the step back, right? The 30,000 foot view of like, here's what's actually happening. Here's what needs to happen to fix it. And here's the action that either myself or someone else needs to take in order to get that fixed.
Perfect. So if you now take that like an order higher or a degree further, how does that ripple into like consequences in your business or problems in your business?
I can see what's coming up is almost like at any point in time, the more doing that I'm doing, the more I should be questioning um, if I'm actually fulfilling my real role, which is to be the leader and the CEO of the company.
And what's your initial response to that?
I guess probably that it would be more of a shift of the type of doing, because I see that that doesn't mean, sitting on the beach. It means doing a different task, a type of role.
Correct. And I would agree with that. So again, I'm not surprised you're making these connections, but it's beautiful to see how quickly you actually do them. So with that, like who or what would you be if you lost the ability to have this identity of I need to be useful?
I think the fact that I'm having a hard time coming up with it shows the depth of the problem.
Okay. And what's coming up for you internally, like emotionally around that?
Frustration,
Okay.
probably used to kind of having an answer, right? You kind of used to, well, as we've been talking about, having something to do, or knowing what to do, or thinking I know what to do. So yeah, definitely a little bit of like frustration and fog.
Okay. So I just want to acknowledge the transparency of that because I know it's a very hard thing, especially for people in leadership positions to like admit, and especially in a container like this as well. And also to normalize like how frequently I do encounter that, like in the work that I do. And then two, if you are having such a hard time imagining, so not even like considering or like practically looking at, but like my brain gets stuck using my imagination to explore and consider like who would I be if I lost this limiting belief that I need to be useful? How many options and opportunities do you think you're missing because you're constantly operating with this blind spot?
Yeah, a lot. I think I can see now that I'm thinking about, what's the difference between usefulness and productivity, and I'm looking for the yang to that basically. And I think part of it is, what's coming up is creativity, inspiration. Um, yeah, those are the two things that come up, which would be if I wasn't so laser focused on usefulness, that would be a good way to be creating space for creativity and inspiration.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back beautifully to what we discussed earlier of like, okay, so if I am not optimizing for constantly being useful, in many ways that ripples out to I'm constantly optimizing for many ways to be right because it's not useful to be wrong. So I'm going to fear failure. Inspiration and creativity is actually all in the space of experimentation, hypotheses, trying different things, failing quickly, like all of these things that, kind of become a cliche, but it's like you see how many prompts we had to do to like even get to, ooh, like be kind of nice to be more creative and inspired, essentially. Be kind of nice to be more authentic, more free, and not burdened by having to be so, you know, proper for lack of a better word. So again, what comes up for you with that reflection?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on the progress that we've made at the company so far, and I'm seeing that, in a positive way, that I feel like we have had uh, we've made quite significant shifts and changes and pivots, and been flexible and willing to adapt. So the optimistic part of me right now is feeling like, probably doing maybe a decent job still, despite what we've talked about, of being willing to fail, of being willing to be creative, of being willing to try new things. You know, uh, if we went back to where we started with Ogimi, it's actually very different. Like you would probably be like, yeah, this is a completely different approach, idea, philosophy, thesis, right? So, that's what came up at first. And I wonder if that's if I have maybe a negativity bias towards um, not seeing the positive things that essentially the things that I'm doing right, and acknowledging them as, like you're saying, kind of the willingness to fail is actually a success, right? So now I'm saying, oh, maybe I'm not seeing successes in the way that I could.
Correct. So what I reflect back just from this conversation is that's very likely, given that like we started this conversation with you saying the way you cope through these things normally is I need to take the time to reframe, tell a better story, look for evidence of the positive. So I'm not surprised that that negative bias would, create some blind spots on, well, okay, what's the actual reality? 110%. And I think this conversation isn't so black and white in the sense that, okay, like you're not taking any risk, you're not taking any creativity, you're not doing any of these things. It's more about if you are the leader at the front of this helm and these things are coming up, this is really an exploration of how am I creating friction in our ability to move forward and in my ability to operate forward with these limiting patterns. So it's less about like kind of binary. It's more, are we unnecessarily or am I unnecessarily creating this friction that's slowing everything down, that's makes it like so it's longer for me to see the opportunities that are actually there. And in addition to like let's just say the performance and the results that could improve as a result of removing that friction, what's my inner experience of all of this? Am I experiencing more fulfillment? Is it more joyful to actually do this stuff? Do I feel more enthusiasm and peace when I'm in these states, right? Can I go through the nose quicker and faster, right? Can I look at things more objectively without having to take care of the drama first? Like it's really more just an invitation of the inner experience and then how that translates into the outer results. So again, what lands for you there?
Yeah, it was what was coming up for me was a recent conversation where someone sort of expressed that internally we all have a sort of a masculine and a feminine, right, regardless of our external gender. And that the feminine is more of the creativity and the inspiration, and the masculine is more of the doing and the deciding. And I could see that I'm probably maybe over identifying with the masculine in this case, right? And that's where I'm really focused, and I'm not recognizing and acknowledging and kind of celebrating the side of me that is creative and inspired. I can see it outside of work, with again like music and food and play and all of those things, but less so where within my work, I can see all the things that I've been doing recently, like some of the product design and the creativity and the features and all of that stuff is actually very creative and inspired. But when I'm going through it, I feel like I'm seeing it as uh, the doing, right? The task, like the thing that has to be accomplished today is this product design.
Correct. And I think it's a good thing you brought into the space because it is true that dichotomy of like the doing versus the inspiration. It's like the feminine, the masculine. Yes, that is all true. And it is the distorted or wounded masculine that generally tends to narrow the space through which the feminine energy can actually flow.
Yeah.
The more kind of embodied, it's not good or bad, it's just like different versions of the same energy, but the more embodied masculine actually just does the work to create the constraints and expand his capacity of those constraints that the feminine energies can safely flow through, right? Which kind of coincides exactly. This isn't like binary of like it's this or that. It's this is the general experience. This is where I want to go. How do I expand and have more of these experiences? So yeah, I think we're actually saying the exact same thing in different ways. So anything else you want to add to that?
I not specifically, no.
Okay, cool. So I know there's a lot more areas we can like dive into this, and I know it's kind of like opened up a few doors. And obviously, as much as I wish I could eliminate all these things and the scope, it's kind of
Let's do it.
outside of it here. Um, and none of that, we don't actually have the time for it, as far as like this episode. But as far as like mapping this out or exploring this, like, does this feel complete for you, or is there still something left outstanding?
I mean, I think it's really helpful. I mean, it's again, like for my personal practice, personal development, whatever, it definitely starts for me with awareness. And so you've definitely shined a light and elevated my awareness on these things, which I know is, yeah, at least let's call it like standing at a fork in the road and having a spotlight on one that helps you kind of get going down it, right? So I'm pretty intrigued by it actually, and excited. Like this for me, it's cool because the juice now is in, and this wasn't true for me like 2 or 3 years ago. The juice is actually becoming aware and like seeing, oh my God, this is what I'm doing and this is what's going on with me. And that now to me is exciting instead of used to be kind of a turn off, right? Or like make me want to ignore it. So I guess I'm open minded at this point and kind of grateful for cracking this open.
Beautiful. Well, I'm glad that that's expanded for you, and that you see kind of how this whole thing plays out in more detail now. So yeah, why don't you then just close us off and let everybody know, where to find you, who's the best person to find you. Floor is yours for that.
Awesome. Yeah, you can find us just at ogimi.ai. So it's spelled up here, but ogimi.ai, and that can direct you to all our social and also can direct you to the app. I guess the shout out would be I'd love for people to try it. It is free to try. And, as you heard, we're early stages. And even though I may be a bit sensitive to receiving your feedback, I do want to hear it. And over the coming weeks and months, I'll be getting better at receiving it. So that's the idea. Please, really, in sincerity, try it. Leave us feedback. Our mission is real, and the more feedback we can get, the better we can help folks like yourself. So thank you.
Awesome. Love it. So as always, yeah, we'll include that in the show notes. But David, thank you very much for coming on and allowing yourself to be witnessed in this way. And for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Jessica.